Our story begins with a strange family living on the outskirts of the kingdom of Diller. Lloyd was the spouse, and 3 other women were also involved in this unusual household. Iris was the first of them. In reality, she was the most terrifying dragon queen. The second girl was Alice, the family's eldest daughter and the child of the Demon King whom Lloyd had personally slain. Lastly, there was Sophia, the second daughter, who was also known as the Witch of Calamity, a uniquely gifted sorceress. This was the family that a god had, for reasons of its own, falsely created. Today, we are going to learn the history of this fantastic and peculiar family. Everything starts when Lloyd triumphs over the Demon King in their epic, world-altering fight. The battle leaves him covered in blood but also showered in honors for being a formidable and incredibly skillful fighter. He had defeated the Demon King's entire army, a force of thousands of powerful beings, single-handedly. The Demon King himself, in his final moments, asserts that Lloyd possessed a power not found in humankind, a power that was almost on par with, if not greater than, that of the gods themselves. According to the dying king, Lloyd would have nowhere to go after this victory. He would eventually lose all sense of purpose in life, at which point the people he saved would begin to fear him, seeing his immense power as a major problem for the world. The Demon King, as a result, demands that Lloyd kill him, granting him the honor of being slain by a great and valiant warrior. He asks if Lloyd was prepared for that. Without a second thought, the main character gets ready to deliver the final blow to the legendary Demon King. The king claims that the path Lloyd has chosen will be dressed with his own death, and that was more than enough to suffice. The protagonist bids the Demon King, Duke, farewell in response to his final remarks, and the Duke, in turn, bids the valiant Lloyd farewell. Ultimately, he loses his life at Lloyd's hands. Watching this momentous death from a hidden vantage point were 2 girls. One of them was the princess, the daughter of the Demon King, who had just personally witnessed Lloyd take her father's life. The princess's guardian, a loyal protector, stepped forward to warn her against getting too close, in case the warrior discovered their presence. She reminded the princess that she was the last hope for her people, the only one left to carry on their legacy, especially since the Demon King and his entire army had been wiped out. To live and fight another day, she had to maintain her strength and stay hidden. The princess gave Lloyd a look filled with quiet resolve, promising herself that one day, she would track him down and exact her revenge as she watched him walk away from the silent battlefield. Half a year later, in the kingdom of Diller and inside the Grand Palace, the court officials and nobles were congratulating the protagonist for being the great and brave warrior who saved the country. They praised him as a wonderful hero, commenting on how, even though he came from a background of poverty, he was still able to rise and become someone so great and talented. The ladies of the palace whispered amongst themselves, wondering whether or not he had a partner and fantasizing about how they themselves would love to be his new wife. Lloyd stood before the king and greeted him with a respectful bow. The king congratulated him on defeating the Demon King and asked him to raise his head. He asked if the battle had turned out to be a great success. Lloyd agreed with his words, saying that it was an honor to receive his praise for simply doing his duty. After a long time, with the king's continued support and thanks to the kindness and rewards he received, Lloyd was able to recover completely from the grueling fight. The king declared that the rewards offered were only the minimum they could provide to the hero who had saved their entire country. He then commented that the true reason he had summoned the brave hero to the palace that day was because he wanted to give the protagonist a part of his territory, a statement that left Lloyd confused. The king, in his own name, announced that he would grant the brave Lloyd the title of Earl and a border territory to govern. Everyone in the palace applauded the birth of a new Earl. Amidst the celebratory atmosphere, however, Lloyd's new reality revealed another, darker layer to the developing story. He was told that he had been gifted a mansion, an amazing gesture that was tempered by some dark news. East of Roa, a recent development had upset the region's stability. An abundance of terrifying monsters had taken up residence in the once thriving iron mines. Eager to take back control, the monarch had sent a superior army to neutralize this terrifying danger. Sadly, none of the armed men returned. The mission was a complete and utter failure. Now that his losses were mounting, the king looked to the protagonist, seeking the strategic thinking and overwhelming power needed to solve this puzzle and get rid of the frightening creatures. This realization gave the story a fresh perspective, introducing smaller, more localized stories with significant issues that required the protagonist's direct involvement. It was going to be an exciting and dangerous journey, especially with the possibility of facing formidable enemies east of Roa. Lloyd readily agreed to the task he had been given. As soon as he left the palace, the people around the king began to worry about the monarch's decision. They pointed out that the territory given to Lloyd was on the borderlands, a harsh place where crops rarely grew. They feared that if he found out it was just a lifeless, barren place, he might complain. But the king assured them that would not happen. Lloyd, he explained, did not desire material wealth. As long as he was alive and had a purpose, he would be satisfied. However, it was precisely in those lands that the great Dragon King was living, a being who was said to be immortal and possessed the ability to destroy an entire country in just one night. Even the Demon King himself had been incapable of facing the Dragon Queen, the true supremacist among the dragon race. The king was fully aware that even Lloyd was probably far from being a match for such a creature. This revelation left the king's advisor in a state of shock. He realized the king was trying to put his own hero to death. The king agreed, admitting that he wanted his hero dead now more than ever. He confessed that from the very beginning, his plan had been to let his great hero and the Demon King kill each other. But Lloyd had proven to be too powerful, and that world did not need that kind of overwhelming godlike power. The king's plan to eliminate the soldier who had the power to save the world, but also the power to destroy it if he chose, had reached its final stage. The king would not give up on ending the great hero's life, especially since that warrior was no longer of any use to them. So, a month later, in the suburbs of Roa, Lloyd was traveling in a carriage, heading towards his new domain. He had already realized that he had probably been quietly expelled from his own country. He observed the barren landscape, noting that there were barely any plants in this territory. He wondered if this was really where the great monster was supposed to be living. But, as he had expected, the king of the kingdom was afraid of him and had ended up sending him to this empty and lifeless territory. It wasn't surprising. If he were in the king's position, he might have taken a similar action. This made him realize that this was just the inevitable result of his past choices. He remembered the day he had applied to take part in the body modification experiment, all to become a great and strong soldier. Lloyd's parents had died early, and no matter where he went, he was always treated like a problem child, an outcast. When he realized that the world no longer had a place for him, his desire to search for meaning in it had all but disappeared. Yet, he still volunteered that day to become an experiment, driven by a simple, desperate want to become needed by someone, anyone. In the end, the scientists succeeded in their experiments on Lloyd. From that day forward, he would become not only a great exterminator but a true warrior for his country. The scientists didn't care too much about what he would become as a person. He was just a grand experiment that had turned out to be a resounding success. Even after ruling out several flaws, the king was finally happy with what they had created using Lloyd's body. After that, he was able to defeat the Demon King, and in doing so, he also lost his primary reason for existing. He had been given too much power and was now being discarded as an unnecessary, dangerous existence. This led him to wonder if there was any reason for him to continue living at all. While he was reflecting on this grim reality in the carriage, a voice suddenly called out to him. The carriage driver noted that there was no grass to feed the horses in this region and that the path ahead was becoming too difficult to travel. If they went any further, it would become problematic. Lloyd understood that the owner of the carriage was afraid of the monsters rumored to live here and decided to get off. He thanked the man for the ride, acknowledging that he had still been able to get quite far thanks to his help. Soon, he was walking away from the man in the carriage, who quickly began to drive off in the opposite direction. On his way, the driver heard a great noise, and when he looked back, he realized the hero had completely disappeared from where he had been standing. That was because Lloyd had continued his journey on foot, moving at a frighteningly fast speed. Meanwhile, on Mount Ragnar, inside a large tunnel, the protagonist had brought some light equipment from the city so that he could explore the place and face the monsters without too much trouble. Even so, he was curious to know what kind of monster lived here, especially in a place as vast as this. As Lloyd entered the mines, a huge dragon appeared before him, its voice booming through the cavern. "What do you want infiltrating this place that is my territory?" it demanded, introducing itself as the Great Dragon King and threatening him for picking a fight in such an outrageous way. Lloyd thought to himself that the Dragon King was indeed massive and wondered how such a huge creature had ended up in a place like this. Meanwhile, the Dragon King insisted on receiving answers to his questions. "Are you too scared to say anything, human?" he taunted. Lloyd replied calmly, "I forgot what the word fear meant a long time ago." He then informed the Great Dragon King that the mountain did not belong to him, as it was actually in King Diller's territory, and now Lloyd himself had the right to it. The dragon was a little surprised that the human hadn't feared his presence. "If you love your life, you should run away immediately," it advised. But Lloyd refused, stating that he was following orders from the king of the country himself. The dragon laughed, a deep, rumbling sound. "You're really interesting," it commented. "For that, I'll give you a present." Without any further hesitation, it launched a torrent of fire directly at the protagonist's head. But, to the Dragon King's astonishment, nothing happened to him. The flames dissipated against an unseen barrier, leaving Lloyd completely unharmed. The Dragon King was shocked that his powerful fire attacks had no effect and wondered how that could be possible. Lloyd explained, "As you can see, what I'm using now is a protective energy barrier." This made the Dragon King even more impressed. The protagonist apologized, explaining that he was a rather special being and that his own body was, in a way, broken from the start. The Dragon King, still insistent on finding a way to beat the protagonist, decided to use his own massive body to end his opponent's life, even though his fire powers had no effect. With a mighty roar, he swung his tail, but Lloyd just stopped the attack with one hand, without any apparent hesitation. The Dragon King only grew more and more surprised by what he was seeing. "Are you really a human, to be this strong?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Lloyd replied that he was no longer a human like he used to be. "In any case," Lloyd insisted, "we should leave this pointless conversation aside." He sheathed his sword, stating that even it was no longer needed, and simply lunged at the Dragon King with his bare fists. At this, the protagonist attacked his opponent with a barrage of non-stop, powerful punches, sending the massive dragon flying away and crashing hard into the wall of the great iron mine. After being beaten so thoroughly, the dragon began to tremble with a mixture of fear and shock at what was happening. This familiar reaction made Lloyd think that he had lost count of how many times he had seen those same eyes of fear and shock directed at him. The protagonist then asked if the dragon intended to leave the place once and for all. If it left peacefully, he said, there would be no need for him to look for it again. The Dragon King, however, defiantly stated that he would never surrender to humans and demanded that Lloyd kill him. But Lloyd just continued his line of questioning, asking why the Dragon King wasn't fighting him seriously. After all, he noted, attacks with fire and using its tail were maneuvers that he could easily avoid and deflect, especially if the dragon wasn't confined to the iron mine. This made the protagonist realize that the dragon didn't actually want to kill him. To put it more bluntly, it was more like the Dragon King was just trying to scare people away from his territory, not actively harm them. The Dragon King hesitated, then replied that the protagonist was delirious and insisted again that Lloyd take his life once and for all. But instead, Lloyd turned around. "The king ordered me to kill the monster here so that there would be no more losses to the kingdom," he said. "Considering you haven't caused any actual damage or loss, that order can no longer be carried out. It has no reason." The Dragon King cried out, not understanding why Lloyd wouldn't just kill it, especially since he was aware that for humans, a dragon's body was equivalent to a great and valuable treasure. He asked if that wasn't what Lloyd himself should also want at all costs, like any other human. Lloyd agreed, admitting that with the dragon's body, he could indeed get enough money to buy an entire country. "But I don't care about those things," he stated simply. "I've killed enough. That's why I don't want to cause any more unnecessary deaths with these blood-drenched hands." The Dragon King became interested and asked what had happened to him to make him think in such a way. Lloyd told him his story. He was a warrior, and on the king's orders, he had faced and defeated the Demon King's army single-handedly. Now, he was considered a threat to all of humanity. He himself was aware that the order to kill the Dragon King was just another attempt by the king to get him to kill another powerful being, so that they could eventually get rid of him. The Dragon King asked why he had accepted the order if he had been aware of it all along. The protagonist replied that it was because he had nothing, not love, not a family. All he had was this immense power. Lloyd knew that if he wasn't the weapon they needed, then there was no reason for him to continue living, and that was a reality he hated deeply. Lloyd decided to leave the iron mine and said that the dragon could stay there if it wanted to. He said his goodbyes, stating that he couldn't care less what the Dragon King did with its life from then on. But then, suddenly, a great, soft light emanated from behind him, and the dragon's voice, now changed, told him to wait. When the protagonist turned around to see what had happened, he realized that a girl had appeared. She claimed to have a suggestion. She introduced herself as Iris, and Lloyd was surprised to see that the massive dragon had transformed into a young woman. Iris asked for the protagonist's name, and when she found out that his name was Lloyd, she asked him to live with her from then on. After hearing that strange request, Lloyd just stared at Iris, his expressionless face leaving her confused. She eventually commented that it was probably because he was so enchanted by her beauty. She knew that males could never resist her attractive looks, but Lloyd flatly denied it. He said he was just thinking that he now understood how such a huge dragon had ended up inside the iron mine and how she was able to change her shape. With his doubts now cleared up, Iris was the one left in shock. She asked if he didn't feel anything for her. No spark of attraction or burst of emotion like men normally felt. This prompted the protagonist to lie, saying that maybe he did, but she realized immediately from his deadpan expression that he was feeling literally nothing for her. Iris couldn't believe that all her beauty was not being appreciated, realizing that not even that could move the heart of this brave warrior. Leaving that aside, Lloyd asked her what she meant about them living together. Iris, referencing the protagonist's earlier words, mentioned that he didn't have a family. She then became embarrassed to say her request directly again, which made Lloyd give up asking and just start to walk away. But she quickly held him back and said that she wanted to become his partner. The protagonist accepted without even thinking twice, leaving her surprised by how simple and direct he was. She insisted that she wanted to become his partner for real, and if he didn't even understand what that meant, Lloyd confirmed that it meant they had become husband and wife. Iris insisted that according to the ancient legends of dragons, Those who had the grace to help them were required to receive the fidelity of the dragon they helped, or even become that dragon's partner. Lloyd didn't seem to mind too much and said it was fine, telling her that there was a mansion nearby and it would be all right if they lived there from then on. But Iris asked him to wait a moment. Before the protagonist made his final decision, she wanted to be able to tell him about her life story and her old tales. She said that a long, long time ago, dragons used to live peacefully in that land. One day, she came across a human who had fainted, and she decided to help him in a moment of kindness. The person she helped recovered afterward, and he became unafraid of dragons, thanking her sincerely for her help. What's more, he offered that they could become great friends. So, she ended up visiting the country of the human who had welcomed them, and for a time, peace and friendship were established between the two races. They lived looking after each other's countries, with the dragons protecting the human caravans, and so the country started to become more and more prosperous and peaceful. The days went by quickly and happily. Then, one day, as was their custom, the humans gave the dragons the minerals they loved so much to eat. As usual, the dragons ate those minerals. But this time, something was wrong. Now, those lands were just the ones they were standing on, vague and lifeless. Since then, she had come to be known as the cruel Dragon King. Her great crime, in her own eyes, was allowing her people to die, which also involved those who were not directly related to her. To punish herself, she had secluded herself inside the mine to live a solitary life of redemption. An enormous amount of time passed, and throughout all those centuries, Iris had always wondered what fate had in store for her. She had hoped that someone would eventually be born with enough power to kill her and end her suffering. And yet, Lloyd himself had chosen to spare her life. She confessed that she was also tired of punishing herself in isolation. So, she wanted to ask the brave warrior Lloyd, who had killed and frightened many people and lived like her in solitude, if they could at least live together now that he had decided not to kill her. Once again, Lloyd just agreed without even thinking twice about her question, leaving Iris in shock because he was always such a simple person. She asked him if he had thought about it seriously after hearing her tragic story. The protagonist simply mentioned that, for whatever reason, fulfilling the wishes made to him was his only reason for living. If this was what Iris needed, he would strive with his own life to fulfill her will. Lloyd then ended up calling her his wife, which made Iris cry with emotion, and she called him her husband in return. But, leaving the emotional part aside in a matter of seconds, the protagonist commented on how Iris's personality had changed so quickly, from the fearsome dragon to her more timid human form now. She replied that she was only pretending before, trying to scare him away. Considering that she had been isolated and alone for so long, she admitted it was expected that she would be a bit antisocial and wouldn't know how to interact properly with people. Lloyd decided to accept her answer and told them they should leave. But before she could ask where, he simply scooped Iris up into his arms and ran out of the iron mines with her at a frightening speed. She asked where he was going, but soon Lloyd told her that they were arriving at their new home, which surprised her because it was a huge, sprawling mansion. The protagonist said that they should choose a room to stay in and started calling her Iris as his new nickname. But Iris complained that Lloyd always had an expressionless face and asked if he couldn't express a little more affection from time to time. But in any case, she was content for the time being because now they would be husband and wife, and he would need to make her smile a lot more from now on. Later, in the bedroom of Lloyd's new mansion, he stopped to rest, thinking that it had been a very long and eventful day. He couldn't quite believe that he was now, in a sense, having a family. He wondered if this was his new reason for living. Thinking more about the term family, he remembered someone he hadn't been able to protect in the past, someone who was like a loved one to him. He wondered if he really deserved something like that now. Suddenly, Iris appeared in his room, suggesting that they sleep together that night. Of course, the protagonist agreed without even thinking twice. Iris lay down, embarrassed, and asked him to be very, very gentle with her. The scene then cuts to the next morning. While Lloyd was washing his face, he noticed that Iris was in a particularly bad mood. He asked her why she was making so much noise so early in the morning. This made her start shouting at him, calling him an idiot because, even though it was their first night together sleeping in the same bed, he had just gone to sleep immediately after lying down and hadn't done anything with her. This made her question his masculinity. The protagonist replied that he couldn't imagine they were able to sleep together so comfortably and couldn't complain about it because the bed was not too tight for both of them to lie down together. This only made Iris even angrier because he was thinking all the wrong things. She told him that she wasn't complaining about the bed, but about him. Iris said she had done all the dressing up and preparing, but in the end, Lloyd didn't do anything. This made the protagonist apologize and ask her what exactly she wanted him to do, telling her to just say it directly. Iris got embarrassed and started talking indirectly about what a husband and wife normally did together, which was mating. Lloyd kept thinking about the term she used, which made Iris embarrassed again, leading her to ask him if he didn't happen to know what it was. He replied that he did, but commented that it was something that only happened when a couple loved each other. This led him to ask if Iris loved him, which made her feel ashamed, and she deflected the subject by saying that it was something only humans thought about. She didn't know there had to be love involved for it to happen. Lloyd said that if it was still what she wanted, it was his role as her husband to fulfill her wishes, and commented that they could do it right away, which left Iris shocked and ashamed again. She then flew off, saying that since her partner had decided to become loyal to the humans, she would become loyal to their customs regarding mating, and they didn't need to do anything until they fell in love with each other. Since Iris was the one who suggested it, Lloyd just went along with it. She then decided to go out and prepare some food, knowing that it was something that wives should normally do. This conversation made the protagonist think that being a husband was even more difficult than facing the Demon King, because there were several steps and obstacles to overcome. Later, Iris returned to the house with something in her arms, leaving Lloyd at a loss to understand what exactly she had brought. She explained that it was her favorite mineral and also a chicken that was in the area, suggesting that they could eat it that day. The protagonist tried the mineral and said that he couldn't sustain himself on it, which surprised her because she didn't know that humans didn't eat minerals. So Iris suggested that he eat the chicken's fresh meat, which made Lloyd comment that it was undercooked. She decided to prepare the food in a better state for her husband to eat and roasted the meat with her fire powers until it was black as coal. She celebrated because now he should be able to eat it perfectly and without any problems. Lloyd said it tasted good now, and Iris decided to eat it too, only for her to complain that it tasted terrible. But the protagonist insisted that it tasted good because she had made it for him herself, and that was enough to make it delicious. Even though he wasn't able to eat the minerals she ate, Iris was embarrassed and wondered if Lloyd was a bit of a delicate person. She worried if she could just let a person like him eat what she had made that tasted so awful. She realized that as a wife, her pride would not allow her to let Lloyd keep eating something bad until she could truly satisfy her husband with her cooking. Iris then asked what was missing to make it tastier, and he replied that it was salt, which made her realize that she had left out the spices. After discovering that they could get spices like that in town, a 2-day drive away, she asked him to wait for her for a few minutes because she was going out to get some salt. Lloyd told her that she needed money to buy things and asked if she even had any, which made her hesitate. He continued to ask if she had any experience buying things before, which again made her nervous. Finally, she asked her husband to accompany her shopping. Lloyd agreed because there was also something he needed to do in town, and now that he was prepared, they could go. But she quickly stopped him from going into town because he was carrying such a large sword around his waist. The protagonist insisted that they could be attacked by thieves on the way and they'd better be careful. Iris replied that if they had to, just her normal monster power would be enough, which made her sigh, wondering how he could be so silly. Iris commented that besides, there wouldn't be any thieves along the way, especially since they would be traveling to the city while she was in her dragon form. So, the couple decided to head into town to do some shopping. Eventually, the two arrived in the town of Ipen. Lloyd suggested that they should get off somewhere where the townspeople couldn't see them, like near the forest. After getting off and arriving in the city proper, Iris was impressed by how much the human world had developed. She immediately went straight to the first butcher's shop she saw and started eating the meat that was on display. This caused the salesman to go into shock and demand the money for the product that was on sale. Lloyd apologized to the owner and paid for the meat she had eaten, explaining that his wife was a bit strange. This left Iris shaken, because she couldn't believe that someone like Lloyd was calling her strange when he was much stranger than she was. The protagonist explained that humans had rules when it came to buying things, and for that, she needed to pay first. This made her apologize, as she had never bought anything before. But Lloyd just decided to put that incident aside and said that they should buy what they needed, do the work he needed to do in town, and go home. Iris, however, drew his attention to the idea of going for a walk in the city, and the two ended up in a clothes store, which she was delighted to see. Because her husband was always such a sensitive person, she decided to drag him along to do some shopping. Iris started looking at the clothes in the store, and a saleswoman appeared in a matter of seconds to attend to them. But Iris ignored her and just decided to pick out some clothes that were pretty, asking Lloyd what he thought would look good on her. But as he just agreed with everything she was saying, Iris got annoyed and asked if he was really paying attention, because he was reacting in the same way to everything she showed him. The protagonist insisted that he was being sincere, which made Iris decide to try on one of the garments. This made the saleswoman want to show her even more clothes, but Iris refused, saying that she didn't need to. Lloyd was surprised that she wouldn't want to buy the clothes, and she explained that her own clothes were made of energy and she didn't need to buy new ones. She could just memorize what they looked like and recreate each one on her body. This made Lloyd comment that the Dragon Queen, the head of the dragon race, was surprisingly miserly. Iris complained that she was only being economical, and he just agreed without much hesitation. The couple decided to continue walking around the city on a sort of date until they finished their shopping. Then, they both stopped at a nearby restaurant to eat, which made Iris anxious because she wanted to be able to learn more about human cuisine. When she tried a plate of roast chicken, she was impressed by how tasty it was. a meat that was well roasted with lots of well-placed spices. She realized that Lloyd praised the food too, even though he always kept the same expression when he ate anything. Iris thought that it would be a bit difficult to replicate and wondered how she could learn to cook so perfectly. She heard a couple at a nearby table feeding each other, which made her excited. She decided to replicate the same with Lloyd, wanting to feed him with her own fork. But the protagonist didn't understand at all and replied that he was just fine eating on his own and didn't need any help, leaving her shaken and him not understanding why she was acting strangely the whole time they were in town together. Iris started to think that maybe she was just setting high expectations and that maybe Lloyd was actually bored of being around her. After all, they were only a couple in name, and there was no real affection between them. Lloyd asked if she was all right, and Iris agreed because she had just gotten a bit tired. Until suddenly, in the middle of the conversation, a customer started shouting at the restaurant staff, complaining that they were serving cheap wine and taking it as an insult. The customer became so angry that he punched an employee and held the employee's wife hostage, throwing the bottle of wine at the employee's head without caring. The customer said that he would forgive the employee if he gave him all his money and his own wife. Of course, the employee refused, which made the customer want to hit him with the gun that was in his hands. But soon, Lloyd appeared to prevent a murder scene from happening. The customer was shocked and asked why he had intervened. The protagonist replied that it was simply because he heard someone calling for help, and obviously, he would respond to save whoever was in need. The protagonist held the client's gun so tightly that he started to break it with his bare hands, leaving the man in shock. Then, he ordered his men, who were clearly a gang of thugs, to go after Lloyd. When Iris realized that a fight was about to break out, she asked him to be careful not to accidentally destroy the restaurant. So, when the thugs threw blades in his direction, he simply held them up as if they were sheets of paper, stating that guns were forbidden because they would end up causing damage to the store. Lloyd bent the blades as if they were nothing, still saying that it was dangerous and they should leave it alone so that no one would get hurt. Soon, the bandits ended up falling to the ground in shock because the protagonist was simply monstrous. The man who was still holding the waitress hostage told him not to come any closer or he would harm the hostage. But Lloyd didn't care one bit and simply punched the guy in the face, sending him flying away and out of the restaurant, leaving all the other customers in shock at what they were seeing. At this, the protagonist confirmed that he had completed his mission perfectly and the restaurant was in perfect condition, without being destroyed. This made everyone around celebrate because he was super strong and cool with his skills. Iris gasped because Lloyd was her husband, but soon some guards came running in, telling them that they had received a report that some soldiers had appeared there and asking if everyone was all right. The protagonist told them what happened and handed over the men he had defeated like sacks of potatoes to the soldiers, leaving them surprised because Lloyd had defeated them all. The soldiers then asked for the protagonist's name so they could find out exactly what had happened, and he revealed that it was Lloyd Blanc, leaving everyone in shock because they all knew the name of the one who had defeated the Demon King. The soldiers practically worshipped the protagonist because they were fans of his and it was an honor to be in front of the great hero. But Lloyd didn't care much and just told them to give the mission accomplished report sheet to the king, because he had completed the task he received earlier involving the dragon. Just then, more and more people started showing up inside the restaurant just to see the great hero and celebrate, which made Iris say that they should leave. But the protagonist mentioned that they couldn't leave because it was too crowded at the door. The employees who were saved helped the protagonists out of the back door, and Iris thanked them, asking if they were okay. The employee agreed because he was used to dealing with that kind of thing but still wanted to be able to thank them for their help. Lloyd said that the next time they saw thugs like that, they should not get too involved because he was clearly a weak person who would only end up getting hurt. This made Iris angry because the protagonist was a bit cold in his words. But the employee replied that he had only ended up acting out of emotion when he was worried that something might happen to his beloved wife, and that worry hurt more than any wound. This ended up making the protagonist reflect on his words, but Iris soon said that they should go back at once because they were wasting too much time there. Before they went, the employee's wife presented them with some food. At the end of the day, Iris commented that a lot had happened, and yet it was only the second day since they had become husband and wife. Thinking about it, she thought about how that couple in the restaurant weren't just a couple in name but were actually a real couple with affection involved, which made her a little jealous. Suddenly, Lloyd simply put a snack in her mouth. She didn't understand why. Despite it being a tasty snack, it was very sudden. The protagonist explained that he had only done it intuitively because she had opened her mouth and said, "Ah," when she sighed. Iris was surprised that he would do something like that just for the hell of it. Lloyd told her that he had just ended up forgetting that it was something couples used to do. Even though they were only a couple in name, he still wanted to be able to act like a real couple. This made Iris laugh, thinking that she was being a fool to worry because it wasn't just her, but Lloyd himself was trying in his own way to act like a real couple. After the protagonist fed her again, she thanked him and said that the snack tasted good, causing Lloyd to show a more relaxed expression for the first time. Iris said that now they could go home and she could finally start practicing how to cook some things properly. This time, she would be relying on Lloyd's opinion as to whether she was doing well or not. and so, slowly, the two of them began to get closer to being a real couple. Another morning, Lloyd tells his wife that he is going out to train, which surprises her. It seemed that the protagonist was trying to get even stronger, and she really couldn't understand his mind. Lloyd explains that it was just part of his routine and asks if she would like to accompany him, which makes Iris very happy. She decides to prepare a packed lunch for them to eat at the training site. The protagonist tells her that getting there was also part of the training and simply starts running quickly, leaving Iris in shock because it was totally different from what she had imagined. He was practically flying from running on his own legs. In the end, Iris was not able to keep up with Lloyd's pace, but he knew that as she was the Dragon Queen, his wife would be fine despite everything. The protagonist was doing his typical training of sitting under a waterfall, and when a tree trunk falls on his head, he sends the trunk flying through the air and destroys the entire waterfall with just one kick, making him sigh because that was all he could do that day. Finishing his physical training for the day, the protagonist is preparing to start his mana training when he comes across a forest cub fleeing from a large monster chasing it. But when the creature notices Lloyd's presence, it simply turns around and runs away, leaving him confused for a moment until he realizes that it was probably all because he was not containing his mana right now. For beasts with sensitive senses, Lloyd was now scarier than any ordinary predator. But even so, the cub that was left behind was growling at him, even though it was wounded, which surprised him for a moment as he wondered if that cub didn't have the strength to escape again. Lloyd eventually lets the cub eat the meat he had brought to feed himself that day, and the cub becomes attached to the protagonist, which reminds him of a nostalgic feeling very similar to the one he felt for his younger brother in the past. Suddenly, a wolf appears and snarls at Lloyd, making him realize that the animal hasn't run away either. But he soon understands that the wolf was not actually running away out of fear because it was after its puppy, who had ended up running away and tried to risk its life to protect its child. Observing this, Lloyd tells the wolf to be careful not to lose sight of the cub again so as not to end up like him, and ends up being left alone in the forest. Lloyd realizes that the sun is setting and decides to return home to where his family was waiting for him. At home, Iris complains about why Lloyd left her behind and took his eyes off her like that. She asks if he was not even afraid that she might get lost in the forest and why he did not wait for her. But the protagonist just continues with the same inexpressiveness and apologizes. As a way of venting her anger, she bites Lloyd, who comments that her bite hurt more than the wolf's, which makes her happy to have been complimented, even though it was not entirely a compliment to begin with. Another day, the couple end up back in town again. Lloyd tells them that it was all because it seemed that the king had received his report on the mission he had completed. In this case, the report of needing to eliminate the Dragon King. Iris asks what exactly the protagonist wrote in the report. Meanwhile, the king was reading the report, totally shocked by what he had just seen. The king's advisor rushes in to find out what happened, and the king tells her that Lloyd married the Dragon King, leaving the two of them at a loss to understand how this could even have happened. The counselor begins to create a fanfic in her mind of how it sounded like something out of a fairy tale, but the king complains because yet another idiot was being born by his side, especially since they were talking about the most powerful hero and the most powerful dragon in their class now being together side by side. The king shouts that this marriage could only be a big lie and that they should only be working together in an attempt to do something against the kingdom and should therefore be eliminated. Suddenly, the king remembers that there was someone who could deal with those two. Then we're back to Lloyd talking to his wife. Iris is surprised that the protagonist told the king about their marriage without even thinking twice. She is embarrassed that they should be seen as two weirdos in town now, especially since at first the king was expecting them to be fighting with each other, not getting married. She knew it would only end up creating some unnecessary rumors when people found out about their marriage. Just then, a voice shouts for Lloyd from outside the mansion about how a new order from the king has arrived. Just as Iris was trembling from the start, the soldier outside tells them that Earl Lloyd Blanc has been given a new mission, to put an end to a cult group called the Wand of Redemption. Iris asks exactly what kind of people were in the Wand of Redemption group, and Lloyd tells her that they were a cooperative of fanatical and obsessive people who thought they were chosen by mana. All the members of that group could see and manipulate mana, and there were those among them who were known and acclaimed as great magicians of mana. They didn't care what happened to people who couldn't use mana and were united in the idea that they could use people who didn't use mana as they pleased. Iris laughs because they thought they were worthy of being mages and were probably just a small group who thought they were powerful and were nothing next to them. But Lloyd tells her that from the report the soldier gave him, apparently those mages had great power, especially the person who was called the Witch of Calamity, who had a mana power equal to that of the Queen of Dragons, which left Iris in shock. Iris complains because humans weren't even supposed to know much about her, and there was no way they could compare someone else's power level with hers. This makes her uncomfortable because it seemed like the king was just trying to send them on another mission where he would make them fight a being so powerful that it could cause Lloyd's death. Iris advises her husband to just ignore that mission request, but he refuses, which makes Iris look at him with pure disdain. Iris says that Lloyd was the great hero who had finished his mission to defeat the great demon king and no longer needed to follow the king's commands or obligations, so there was no reason for him to continue working for someone who was especially trying to take his life and end him. Lloyd agreed, but unlike the mission involving Iris, the group of cultists was causing harm to other people, and it was only right that he wanted to put an end to them in order to save innocent people in the process. That was exactly why Lloyd needed to respond to the cry for help from those who were waiting for someone like him. Seeing his determination, Iris sighs because she knew it would happen eventually, and says that she would go with him on his mission, and he couldn't complain. In parallel, the cultist group was reciting a prayer about how they were all equally precious and the others were equally useless. Everything went in a big circle and everything was for and by them. While they were praying, some members of the cult, who were the parents and leaders of the cult, called for their beloved daughter, Sophia, who was known as the Witch of Calamity. She stands before all the cultists, encouraging them to let mana guide them, and all the cultists continue with their prayers to the Great Witch of Calamity. At the same time, the protagonists were about to arrive at the designated location. Lloyd asked Iris to come down from the sky. Soon, they saw in the distance where the enemy's hideout was, and Iris was impressed because it was a building that was floating in the air. But of course, the protagonist did not want to waste a second to invade the place and end his mission quickly. Iris agreed, saying that she would attack first because it was nothing for someone as strong as her and she would break through that barrier quickly. But when Iris tried to break through the barrier, she was shocked because the barrier was super resistant. Then, while they were still outside, they began to be attacked by magical weapons, like projectiles that came from the sky. Lloyd explained that they were weapons created using a massive amount of mana to hit their opponents. Lloyd gets a boost with Iris so that he can climb even higher and destroy the source of the mana projectiles as well as the barrier that was preventing them from entering. The protagonist ends up realizing that more mana projectiles were heading his way, but Iris quickly burns them up with her firepower. When she returns to her human form, she was annoyed with Lloyd because he had simply used her as a jumping platform without warning and ended up leaving her dizzy with the force of his jump. The protagonist just guides her into the building. In parallel, the cultists realized that something was wrong outside and discovered that there were intruders trying to break in. When they discover that the mana artillery has been completely neutralized, the cultists shout to inform the founder of the cult and the Witch of Calamity about what was going on. But when they all mention the name of the person who was supposedly more powerful than Iris, she immediately goes into a rage at the thought that someone could be known by such a title. The occultists used their mana to summon a golem and send it towards the protagonist couple. But instead of Lloyd himself going into battle, Iris takes her anger out on the golem and destroys it immediately with one blow, leaving the occultists shocked at what they were seeing. The protagonist ends up praising his wife after the attack she launched, but the occultists don't give up and continue to send several other soldiers at them, which only makes Iris even more focused on wanting to finish them all off once and for all so that they never underestimate them again. Iris starts hitting each of the golems with her bare hands, leaving Lloyd at a loss to understand what exactly happened to make her so nervous. But he decides not to ask too many questions and just leaves his wife to face the creatures. He decides to go deeper into the hideout, remembering how the occultists had mentioned they were about to inform the founder about the invasion earlier, and starts to follow the path they had escaped. But soon, he ends up having to dodge an attack that passed directly in front of his face. The occultist who threw the projectile, the swordsman Tama, comments that he knew he must be the famous intruder who was causing so much noise and would now be his opponent in the clash. Lloyd realizes that Tama must be the founder's bodyguard and asks if a swordsman should really just throw his sword like that in an attack without thinking. But Tama mocks the protagonist's innocence because he was able to control his sword from a distance and uses it to pierce his opponent's body from behind to kill Lloyd. Tama tells the protagonist to remember the way he was feeling now because the name of his sword was Thousand, being the magic sword that would take Lloyd's life that day. Lloyd realizes that this was a magical weapon that could be controlled through the use of mana. Tama comments that the fact that he had broken into the hideout so deeply was because he must be a skilled mana user too. He then asks Lloyd why he used mana and still opposed the group of occultists who were mana users just like him. Tama mentions how those who were blessed with mana were superior and those who did not have it were inferior, but that was an even simpler truth than the teachings of that cult. Tama removes the mask that was on his face, and Lloyd notices that the man had a mark that was mana poison. Tama replies that that was a rather pitiful way of describing what he was going through. That was a mark that sometimes appeared on those who were blessed, and Tama called it the sacred mark. He openly began to deify the power of mana, which was the great root that filled the whole world and the most supreme form of energy in existence. With the use of mana, all kinds of things were possible, such as the transformation, destruction, healing, and improvement of human beings. Even so, the sacred mark on Tama's face, given by mana, was treated as something ugly in the eyes of some people, especially those who did not have mana in their bodies and who were, in fact, a bunch of trash. The occult group known as the Wand of Redemption always received that discrimination from the nation, that they were actually a group of horrible, untalented people. And in no way were they inferior because the real inferiors would always be those without mana. Tama says that those who used mana had every right to seek revenge and hold those who harmed them accountable and reign over each and every one of them. He tells Lloyd that as a mana user, he should therefore join the occultists, or else he would end up meeting his end in that very place. The deluded occultist is only shocked when the protagonist asks him if he has finished making his speech, because he did not care what kind of ideology they had and had nothing to do with it. Thomas says that Lloyd has chosen death with this, so he uses his sword to attack the protagonist, which makes Lloyd sigh because that was such a waste of time, and he simply walks past the swords as if nothing was happening. Tama is shocked that he has simply accepted his own death without fighting it in the slightest. But eventually, he is even more surprised that none of the weapons managed to get through the protagonist's body. Lloyd tells Tama that instead of dodging all the swords one by one, it was much quicker just to run towards him and heal himself, which leaves Tama even more shocked because the protagonist had instant healing with an absurd amount of mana. Lloyd revealed that to be precise, he could manipulate and use an infinite amount of mana, stating that the mark on Tama's face was not sacred, but simply a symptom of mana poisoning because he was using much more mana than his own body could handle. In other words, there was nothing that could stand up to the protagonist. But before Tama could even say how magnificent it was, he was punched and flew away through the wall into where the founders of the cult and the Witch of Calamity were standing, leaving them shocked that their bodyguard had been defeated so quickly. Lloyd arrives at the scene, asking about the founders and the Witch of Calamity, and immediately notices the presence of a child at the back. Sophia introduces herself to the protagonist as the Witch of Calamity he has been looking for, and he becomes curious because apparently that child was the person who was supposed to have a power equivalent to that of the Dragon King and could probably be the most powerful mage today. Sophia asks who he is, and in response, Lloyd introduces himself as the hero, leaving the founders in shock because the very hero who defeated the Demon King has appeared in their hideout. And instead of feeling afraid like her parents, Sophia greets him politely. Lloyd says that he received a mandate from the King of Diller because the Wand of Redemption cult was being blamed for various crimes, such as terrorism and kidnappings, so he was sent there to put an end to them. So he told them to surrender or he would have to take their lives, which left Sophia confused because she did not understand any of his words. But her parents, who were the founders, realized that even if they were against the great hero, they could still survive if they kept the Witch of Calamity by their side. Sophia's mother says that Lloyd was a bad person, which makes Sophia ask the protagonist to stop acting like that, and he refuses because it was the king's orders, leaving her worried. The founder tells Sophia to save them because clearly the protagonist was an enemy who needed to be defeated. Despite being against the idea, she decides to use her powers with mana to attack Lloyd, while her parents run away. Lloyd realizes that due to the massive amount of mana used in her attacks, the nicknamed Witch of Calamity was not a title for nothing. Sophia was surprised that the protagonist was not trying to evade her attack like everyone else usually did. Lloyd says again that he couldn't just walk away. Sophia then mixed in an even greater amount of magic to hit the protagonist and intimidate him, asking him what he thought of it all. But Lloyd once again refused to leave because he needed to finish his work, which made Sophia hesitate. Her parents insist that she hit her opponent immediately with that mana attack or they'd end up being captured and separated, at which point they ask her if she really wants to see her parents separated from her. Of course, she refuses. Sophie decides to use her enormous amount of power to throw it in the protagonist's direction, but instead of running away, Lloyd simply uses his own mana to disperse her magic and absorb it for himself, leaving the founders totally shocked by what they were witnessing. Lloyd again tells them to surrender immediately, but the founders think it is absurd that they need to surrender when they would obviously only end up being killed if they did. The protagonist agrees that they would probably receive the death penalty after destroying several cities, kidnapping, and killing people. Lloyd goes on to say that they needed to pay for the sins they had committed, which leaves Sophia worried and confused because she never knew that her parents had done it. After all, they only told her that they were punishing bad people. The founders shout at Sophia to kill the protagonist, leaving her in a state of shock. But they insist by mentally manipulating her and trying to make her believe that they would end up dying just like her real parents if she did not kill Lloyd immediately. This makes Sophie remember how it was the founders themselves who killed her parents and kidnapped her in the past when she was still a child. She screams because she did not want to be alone anymore, and seeing her parents die again was the worst thing that could happen. So she disperses her power with a huge amount of mana. Iris arrives just as that huge amount of mana is being dispersed and is shocked to see the Witch of Calamity trying to use all her power to kill Lloyd. Seeing that great power being directed at them, Iris asks what they should do and who that girl was, and is surprised to discover that she is actually the famous Witch of Calamity. Lloyd realizes that Sophia was hurting herself due to the mana poisoning, destroying her own body by using that huge amount of mana that she also had a limit to control, and he knew that she would end up dying at that rate. Iris transforms into her dragon form so that she can launch herself towards that huge amount of mana, leaving the protagonist confused as to what his wife intended to do. After all, not even she would come out of an attack like that completely unscathed. But Iris replies that if they did not find a way to stop Sophia's mana, she would end up dying. Lloyd comments that even if Iris saved her, she would end up receiving the death penalty or becoming an object of experiments like him, and there was no reason for them to save her life now. But Iris shouts that he was an idiot because after all, there should be no reason for them to hesitate in saving a child, and if there was no way to save Sophia's life, they should just create a way. Despite seeing Sophia destroying herself, the founders shouted at her to keep getting more and more mana so they could kill the dragon and the hero and protect themselves, which drives Iris crazy with rage at what those humans were doing to manipulate the girl. Sophia does as her parents tell her, and mana begins to destroy the hideout, hitting Iris in the process. When Sophie decides to throw all that power in the protagonist's direction once again, he just suppresses and disperses all of Sophia's mana, absorbing it for himself and not getting a single scratch on his body afterwards. The founders are shocked because Lloyd was a real monster, and with that, Sophie ends up losing consciousness after using so much power at once. But before she falls to the ground, Iris runs to be able to hold her, being surprised to see that the child was full of serious bruises. The protagonist assures her that Sophia was safe. This is all because Iris made an effort to suppress Sophia's magic, and so she did not receive enough lethal damage to take her life, which leaves Iris relieved. Lloyd then turns to the founders with the angriest expression in the universe and asks if they still have any cards up their sleeves to try to kill him. But the two decide to appeal to pity and start asking for forgiveness because they were just pitiful people, marked with poisoning and had little time left to live. But soon, the protagonist rips off their faces the marks that were lies and realizes that all that time they had been deceiving even their own occult followers, and on top of that, they had tried to hide their daughter's crimes and used her. Sophia wakes up to hear the discussion, at which point the founders shouted at her to get up and kill them right now. This makes Iris angry because they were trying to make their daughter obey them even though she was in a near-death state if she used her mana power again. Iris begged Sophia to stop because she would really end up dying if she used any more attacks. Before she could use her mana, the protagonist holds Sophia's hand and realizes that this girl was just like him, a disposable weapon. Remembering Iris's words about finding a way to save Sophia's life, Lloyd says that from then on, Sophia would be his and Iris's new daughter, leaving everyone confused by his sudden decision. Lloyd adds that the founders should not disagree if they don't want to die, and they immediately agreed to the protagonist taking Sophia with them without even hesitating to ask for mercy for the girl. The founders say that they could take Sophia as long as they left them alone, revealing that she was not even their real daughter. They had only heard about a girl with great talent for magic and decided to kill her parents and kidnap her. The two founders say they could burn her, kill her, or do whatever they wanted with that useless monster, making Iris die of rage. In exchange for Sophia, they agreed to let them go, but Iris was being sarcastic. She herself sends the two founders flying away with how much hatred she was feeling towards those occultists. The founders complain because Iris tried to trick them with her words, but she just tells them to shut up and tries to take care of Sophia. She knows Sophia must be in a lot of pain right now, but they would take care of her soon, which ends up making Sophia faint after all the pain and shock. Iris asks Lloyd if he could find a way to prevent Sophia from going through a death sentence or some kind of trial, and he agrees that he would find a way. The protagonist starts destroying the entire hideout, saying that it would be much simpler to destroy everything because then the king would never find out that Sophia was able to survive. Iris says that that was a very crude way of solving things, but she would not complain. Later, in Lloyd's mansion, Sophia continues to dream about her lying parents, the founders, remembering the horrible words they said to her just before she fainted. Then she wakes up without understanding where she was and realizes that she was sleeping next to Iris in bed.